Welcome to the Alberta Prosperity Project Podcast. If you're ready to listen, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Thursday, July 21st, 2022. Welcome to episode 11 of the Alberta Prosperity Project Podcast. I'm your host, Hunter, today, joined today with Tanner up in Lloyd. Tanner, how are you?
I'm doing great. I have the hat on again today, I know, but I have an excuse, which is the power's been out or was out for most of the day, and it was sweltering outside. So in an effort to stay cool, you have to wear a hat, of course.
If your hair looks like the way that, if your hair looks how it does, I don't blame you for the hat either.
You know what? There's actually, normally I'd argue with you, but there is merit to your argument because as you know, I can't book a haircut to save my life right now. I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And so I have a bit of an issue there, but oh well, what are you going to do?
That's okay.
So it's been hot out. We have an event today, right? We're in Lloydminster today. You're coming up.
I am. As soon as this podcast gets pushed out and edited, I will be coming up to Lloyd. We'll, see how the event goes. It should be good. We've got a couple barbecues that we're ready to use for some burgers and some hot dogs. We'll have some great speeches. And it looks like so far it's going to be a beautiful day. The sun is shining, so I can't complain. It should be great.
It's going to be a great day. And I was wondering if you're going to take your smoker up here to help grill some hamburgers.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of a couple ways that I could take it back. I mean, I thought maybe I could strap it to the roof of the car. I could, I don't know, maybe even put it onto the hood. It might actually crush the car, though, so I don't know if I want to do that. It is quite heavy, as I mentioned.
Yeah, just put the front seat down, slide it in the back. It'll go.
That's true.
Go. Those scratches will buff out. It's not an issue.
That's right. And I mean, that wouldn't be the issue. You're correct. I think the only issue that I'd have is that much weight in the car. A, I'd be bogged down, and B, it'd probably be burning a lot more fuel. It would make the car a little less fuel efficient. And as you know, and I know, prices at the pumps right now are not very fun. They haven't been now for the last number of months. I know that everyone's been saying the same thing, actually across North America and even the world, where prices are just seemingly going higher and higher. And so that's kind of going to be the topic of today's conversation of why is it so high? Is it high to line the pockets of the corporations, as we're hearing many people say, or how exactly does that play into it? So I guess just to start off with, maybe if you could go over quickly just an overview of how gasoline is distributed across Alberta, that might give a nice segue into the podcast itself.
Right. So the question is there price gouging? That's the idea.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Sure. So we can start with a short overview of how the gasoline market is constructed in Alberta. It's quite simple. We have a lot of oil, lots of oil. And so we drill for that oil, right? Let's say you and I are drilling together oil and we find a bunch of it. Oh, but look, it's black and it's heavy and it's sour. It's not necessarily the oil that can be injected into a vehicle and be usable, because it's like this molasses viscosity of like almost, it's kind of like, it's this thick, heavy, would you even call it a liquid? It's like a sludge. You know what I mean? It's so heavy. It's so heavy. And so, I drive a 1970 International. It's the nicest truck you've ever seen, isn't it?
It's a truck that I've seen. We'll leave it at that. That might be, yes, it is a truck. I promise the listeners it is.
It's a beauty of a truck. His name is Stanley.
Yes.
No power steering, no air conditioning, 3 on the tree, no brake booster. It's just an old school farm truck. You hit a tree, you bend the tree. It's a real beauty in my opinion. But nonetheless, I could maybe in that truck run the heavy oil because that engine is indestructible. I think you cannot kill it. You could put Pepsi in there, and I think that engine would continue to run. But nonetheless, so all vehicles can't take the heavy oil and use it for something to combust because it's so heavy. So it has to go to a refinery.
Right.
We have massive ones in Edmonton and Sherwood Park. They take that heavy oil and they change it and they refine it and they purify it into something that's usable, gasoline or diesel or jet fuel, et cetera, et cetera. And that process costs money and so on, but they do that. And then after that, they add ethanol, right, to the gasoline, according to government regulation, which is it just made from corn?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's
canola too. Is it canola too, maybe?
Yeah, main ingredient. Usually it is some form of a grain, though. That's the
right. But it's like an alcohol. Is whatever. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Add that for government regulation. Great. Go to the storage tank. Buddy from the gas pump, who owns the gas pump, phones the distribution company and says, "Hey, I'm just about to run out of gas in my underground tanks at the pumps. I need a refill."
Right.
Super B shows up with a load of gas. He dumps it into the underground tanks, and there you are. The process repeats. And so when the government isn't involved, it's an efficient process, right? It's a well thought out, market operated process that for the most part is rather efficient, right? History shows that over the course of history, you and I, specifically over the decades, have not had to wait in hour-long or 2-hour-long gas lines at the pumps to fill up fuel, right? There might be 1 or 2 times when that's happened, but on the whole, it's been very efficient. And neither is gas, although it's high priced, it isn't $6 a liter either, right? Over the whole of history, it's been cheap, especially when you compare it to like canola oil or something along those lines, right? Gasoline is much cheaper than any of those things. So the process, again, when not interfered with by government, is efficient.
Yeah, and I guess then with that, that helps move into the next question quite well, actually. And that is, when we're seeing these prices at the pumps, what's the actual normal markup for the pumps? And is that any different than we're seeing now? Like that might give a nice picture of if it is gouging or not. But what is normal?
Right. Well, we found this excellent site, didn't we, called Calibrate.
Yep.
And can you put it on the screen?
Yeah, you betcha. We'll have the graph right there so you can go over for people and they can see
what we have, what's on the screen or going to be coming up on the screen is a graph of Calgary gas prices over the course of a year. And you can change the data and how long the time the x-axis is and so on. But for the moment, the graph on screen is the prices over a year. And it shows the margins of not only the retailers, but of the crude price, the rack price, and taxes, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously the crude price makes up the majority of the price of gasoline. If the price of crude is high, then the price of gasoline is going to be higher than it otherwise would be. Added on top of that is the refining cost. And so that's the rack price, right? That's the cost of the fuel after it's been refined. Am I correct in that?
Yep, that's correct.
Now, that doesn't account for, however, the cost of adding ethanol and so on, right?
Correct. That is completely after the fact.
Right. And there's also no cost for transportation added into that.
No, not
correct.
At the point.
Okay. Yeah. So on the graph, so the bottom blue bar is the crude price. The green bar is the price of gasoline after taking the wholesale price into account, the rack price. On top of that is the retailer price, the price that the retailer charges without taxes. What I mean by retailer is the gas pump, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, it's important to note that this chart does not take into account the transportation cost or the ethanol cost, et cetera, right?
That's correct.
Right. So you might be seeing a 10 cent per liter upcharge or 12 cents, but that doesn't include the transportation cost. So that's actually higher than what it actually is. And then the bar on top of it is the price when you factor taxes into account, which, as you can see, is far and away the second largest cause of the high price of fuel, specifically when the 13 cent per liter tax is involved in the price of fuel, which at present it's been suspended, as you know. But on the whole, it's the second largest factor of gas prices. But nonetheless, back to the graph itself. When you look at transportation costs, ethanol costs, et cetera, the markup on gasoline is low. Right. Yeah. It's like 3 to 6 cents kind of thing at most. Yeah. It is exceedingly low. The pumps don't make money on the average in the long run over the course of history on gasoline. Instead, they make their money with car washes and selling other goods and services in the station. Right.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Right. Now, at the end of the graph, if the listener is watching, there is a deviation, right? Insofar as the wholesale price has dropped, right? And it's dropped significantly. The price that the retailer is paying, however, has not dropped yet. And it's important to say yet, because you can see how the graph itself is relatively stable insofar as the margins stay about the same, no matter what time period you're in. It seems to be the same markups, the same margins, and they're low. Okay. But right now, for the moment, the markups are higher than what they otherwise usually would be. Right. Normally they'd be, again, that, I don't know, what would you say? Maybe 3 to 6 cent range?
Yeah, that's a high range. I mean, we'd see, anywhere from 1 to 5 cents, and 5 cents would be that gas station was doing quite well.
Right.
But yeah, it is so minimal compared to what people actually realize for sure.
Right. Whereas now it's more like 25 cents and so on. So it's quite a bit higher. But obviously there has to be a reason for it. Because if gas pumps were going to gouge, and if they were going to charge this exorbitant upcharge in every liter of fuel, why are they just starting now? Yeah. Why not start 2 years ago when none of us could fly and still needed to drive? Yeah. Why not start 50 years ago for that matter? Like, why are we just starting now to do this? So something that doesn't logically compute, something is going on. Yeah. But normally it's about 3 to 6 cents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess you kind of answered that a little bit here previously, but does the existence of these larger markups imply a huge profit? Like, are we now assuming that these gas station owners are able to line their pockets with this extra 20, 25 cents, or is there maybe other factors that, the graph doesn't account for?
Right. Well, if they were, why aren't you and I in the market?
Mm-hmm.
Like if those gas pump owners were becoming millionaires, what are we doing?
Yeah. Why aren't the listeners in the market? Why is anybody?
Why is the market not being flooded with new gas pump owners? And I know new gas stations are being built, but if you were really earning massive profit, huge profits on gasoline, like what is being apparently charged to them right now, then you would see the market flood with entrepreneurs who wanted to be gas station owners because they want to make money.
For sure.
The question, however, though, is more specified, which is, does the existence of higher markups imply massive profit? No. No, because the information is not significant enough to prove that. It is not sufficient to prove it. What I mean is, okay, so you're normally charging a 3 to 6 cent markup, right? And we know that just about basically breaks even kind of thing. The profit is very minimal, but now you're charging more. But you can't just say, well, they're charging more because they want to start price gouging. Not necessarily. Maybe taxes have increased. Maybe demand has changed. Maybe the availability of fuel has changed. Maybe transportation costs are increasing. Maybe competition around the market is becoming more severe or less severe. Who knows? There are all of these factors that you have to account for. Maybe the cost of wages has increased. Maybe it's harder to find workers now, and so you have to pay them more for them to come work for you. Who knows what it might be? All of these factors account for added costs or different costs or new cost structures in the sale of gasoline, that to just say, well, there's a higher markup, so they're making massive profits, is disingenuous. Maybe they're making more profits, but what we merely mean to say is that that information, that they're making a larger markup per liter, is not sufficient to conclusively say that they're making larger profits. Maybe they are, but maybe they aren't.
Right. Yeah. And you kind of touched a little bit on the next question that I was going into, and that, you kind of touched on taxes and that kind of thing. But my biggest question, I think a lot of Albertans have, is why do the prices differ so greatly across the province? When I am going up to Lloyd, obviously, I will see pumps in different cities and towns that are completely different than, they were an hour earlier. So why is that the case when we are all likely using Alberta gas at these pumps? Like, why such a large discrepancy?
Yeah, good question. Oh, but the answer is because the market is different, right? The market is not the same in Lethbridge as it is in Lloydminster, for example. What I mean by that is, okay, so you might own a gas pump. You might own one in the west side of Edmonton, and I might own one on the east side of Edmonton. Well, those who live in the west probably aren't going to drive to the east to pay 2 cents less for gasoline than they are, they're just going to fill up in the west instead. Right? I am not going to travel to Leduc, for example, to pay for gasoline that is 4 cents cheaper per liter because it's not efficient. It's not economically efficient to do so. I'm going to stay in Lloyd and I'll pay the extra money for fuel. I'll try and find savings, but I'm going to pay the extra money because that's what's economically efficient. What I mean to say is you cannot take the whole of Alberta and say that's one market. It's not, right? It's not at all. The market for gasoline is actually small. You have I don't know how many thousands of these pockets, basically, of sections where there are a few gas pumps, and that determines a little market. So again, the market for gasoline by West Edmonton Mall is different than the market for gasoline by Costco in Sherwood Park. It's a different market, right? Because the demographic is different, the number of pumps is different, the size of the market is different, the demand for gasoline is different, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There was a study done a long time ago called Price Differences in the Gasoline Industry. And we can link the paper maybe at the bottom, and it deals with industrial organization. But there's a quote in there from an executive at Chevron. And I know this is American, but the principle still applies. And I have it here in my computer. And what this executive says is, he says, we price each market to be competitive. In the metropolitan areas, there may be pockets where prices are higher or lower than other pockets, right? He's saying it's based on the market in that specific area. So why is the cost of gasoline different in one section of Edmonton versus another? Or why is it different in Calgary than it is in Cold Lake? Well, because the markets are different, right? The price for bread is more expensive in other areas than it is somewhere else too, right? That's just the way markets operate. So you say Cold Lake gas is cheaper. Well, maybe it is, but why is it cheaper? I don't know. Perhaps it's because, there's a massive influx of people coming from Edmonton to Cold Lake. So everyone needs gas in Edmonton. The demand is higher. It shifts to the right, which raises the price in Edmonton, but not Cold Lake. Maybe.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
Or maybe it's that the cost of labor in Edmonton is more expensive than it is in Cold Lake for a worker. Maybe you don't need any workers at the Cold Lake gas station because it's not as busy. Maybe it's because, you have different buying options. Maybe it's because of a heat wave. Maybe it's because there's a wedding in town. Like there are all of these factors that compose the market structure for the price of a liter of gasoline that it's almost impossible to say exactly why the price is what it is, right? You can say there are a bunch of different factors, and there are. Like obviously, if you have a shortage of gasoline, gas is going to be more expensive to try and offset that. That's clear. But there are unseen factors as well that you can't see. And so why is the market different? Well, why are the prices different? Because the markets are different. Yeah, that's the answer. And I know it sounds vague, but it's as precise as you can make it without uttering some fallacy, some blasphemy, so to say, that isn't necessarily true.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, and that ties into one of the last questions that I've got here, and that is, I think, the main question of this entire point in the entire podcast today is the main simple fact of, is there collusion going on right now between gas station owners to jack these prices up and line their pockets? Right. Is that happening? Right.
Is price gouging real? Is it a thing? And the answer is, well, maybe. It's different. Okay, so the existence of price gouging implies that there's collusion, because you can't gouge prices if your competitor will just take all your business with lower prices, right? So if you're charging $1.50 per liter and I'm charging $1 per liter, everyone's going to come to me, and there is no price gouging because you'll just come back down to $1 to competitive rates. So really what you're asking is there price gouging? You're asking, is there market collusion? And the answer is, well, maybe. In economics, we call it tacit collusion. What that means is, if there is collusion, it's not explicit collusion. What I would do is I would take a look at your prices, you would take a look at my prices, and we could determine, just using our logic and our reason, what you or I are going to do. We can anticipate your behavior and then price our product accordingly. That's called tacit collusion. Explicit collusion is blatantly illegal, right? You can't do that in Canada, and you wouldn't be able to do it in Alberta either.
Correct.
But tacit collusion is much more difficult to prove because it's like, well, I'm just setting prices, and I'm not talking behind my back with other producers or other retailers telling me or I telling them how much we should price our gas at. I'm not doing that, and you can't prove it. So you obviously can't convict a man when he hasn't been proven guilty of anything. So it makes it much, much more difficult. Now, does that tacit collusion exist? Right. Is there price gouging? Well, we've already determined that it's insufficient to say because there are higher markups, there's collusion, or there's price gouging. Maybe not, right? That's not sufficient. That's not enough to say that there is. It's not enough to say that because prices are higher, there is collusion or price gouging. Maybe the market requires them to be higher, right? America is consuming like 3 million more barrels of oil every day than what it is producing. So there's going to be a shortage. So that's something to take into account. There have been more shortages of gasoline in Alberta than there have been in a long time, right? Especially in the South. I've noticed that, where there seems like the pumps will say no gas, right? That happened to me just a little while ago. No 87, no 89, etc. Right. So is there collusion? Again, maybe. Let's play a game. You have a gas station. What are you naming it?
You know what? If I'm thinking about it, I remember a few episodes back, I had mentioned that I like the old Lincoln Continentals.
Yes.
That obviously drink a little bit of gas. So I'd probably call it either, Hunter's Gas Guzzler or the Gas Guzzler, something like that.
That's cool. I like the Continental Cafe.
There you go. Well, I have to have a cafe then. Cool. That's the only thing. That's
but where are you going to make your money?
That's true.
You don't make
Continental
money in
convenience. There we go. Continental convenience.
That's cool. That's cool. I like that. That's cool. Okay, so you have on one side of the road, you have Continental Convenience managed by Hunter, which means it's poorly managed. And it's probably going to go under. But nonetheless, I'm going to get my digs in. For the moment, I just
need a few people with Continentals to come by. I'll be
that's true. And then you would make some money on gas.
Yes.
So on the one side, you have Continental Cafe. On the other side, you have my gas station. Let's call it, what should we call it? Something Stanley's, because like the International. Can you think of anything for me?
Let's see. I'll start thinking while you go over the example.
You start thinking. Yes. Something to do with the International would be the mascot for the gas station.
Yes.
Both of us start out charging $1 per liter of gas. There's no taxes in this utopia, let's say, just for ease of arithmetic. And customers can choose which gas station to go to. It's a two-way street. You can either go left or right. Doesn't matter. No barriers. Totally up to the consumer. Because we're charging the same price, each of us has 50% of the market share. So I take 50% of the customers, you take 50%. Great. Now, if we were a monopoly, if we had just one gas station, our prices would be 25% higher, let's say, than what they currently are. So it'd be $1.25 for fuel versus $1 per liter for fuel. Okay. Right. But they're not, because it's not a monopoly. It's a quote unquote competitive market. There's more than one producer or more than one retailer. Here's the question. Suppose that I, at my cafe with the International as its mascot, decided to raise prices to $1.10. You have a couple of options available to yourself. You can either stay at $1 and take all of my customers, or you can come to $1.10 with me. Right. And we retain our market share. And because gasoline is inelastic, we don't really lose any customers. We just make more money. Okay. The first option, staying at $1, has a problem for you, insofar as if you decide to stay at $1, you'll capture all of 3 consumers before I just lower my prices and say, well, he didn't bite, I'm going back to $1. And there's no real gain for you. I suffer a minimal loss. If, on the other hand, you move up to $1.10 with me, well, then you can make some money, right? Then you can make some profit. Yes? Yes. Yeah. And so it pays you to tacitly collude in this instance, right? It actually makes sense for you to do so, because as a business owner, you want to capture profit, which is fair enough. That's the purpose of business. The business of business is business. Right? It's a famous Friedman quote, and it's good, right? Business exists to make profit. That's its purpose, because it shows us that we're allocating goods efficiently. So in that case, there is tacit collusion, right? Because you can see your price, my price, and because I can see your price, we can coordinate our behavior to raise prices to levels that are otherwise not sustainable in a perfectly competitive market. Now, it's worth noting that, again, over the course of history, the markup on gasoline has been minimal, like next to nothing, 3 to 6 cents at most, right? It's been very, very minimal. So if you were going to gouge like that, why did it not start 50 years ago? And our example is simplified, but the fact remains. Why would you and I not charge $2 a liter?
$6, $7.
$6. Who knows what it might be? Because the gasoline is so inelastic that the curve itself is vertical, right? Because it's inelastic. As you change the price, the consumption of the good doesn't really change much at all. And so if we were really good, we'd be charging $1.75 for gasoline. But then customers might start to leave, because then they might travel 10 or 12 kilometers for different gas because we're that high. And so that's the idea. So is it possible to collude? Yes. But are these prices that we're seeing now evidence of of this high tacit collusion? No. Not yet. That's not sufficient. It isn't sufficient evidence, because we haven't seen the cost structure. We haven't seen the changes in demand, or what we don't know the variables. I've heard there's a shortage of ethanol, maybe. And if there is, that will increase price. And we'll see. Like, prices can be laggy. And so it might be that the prices simply come down in a step ladder like this. And so it just takes a little bit longer to return to those normal margins. We'll see. We'll see.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess then with that, everyone always knows usually the final question that is asked on this podcast. And that is, what would be done differently? We're hearing a lot of people, politicians, individuals all saying we need a price ceiling on gasoline.
No. You're correct. That is a passionate one of mine, because, all these politicians, their whole careers, they're champions of small business. I love small business. I love small business. It's all that we hear. Small business, small business, small business. It's excellent. It's phenomenal. And they preach that until it becomes politically profitable to not preach it, right? So as long as it gets them elected, they'll preach that small business should be protected. But once it becomes that they think small business is the problem, like individual pump owners, well, then small business is no longer to be protected, and it needs to be punished. And a few central regulators need to enter the market and determine for the whole province or country exactly what the price of gasoline should be. No. Is there anyone here who's listening, or would you yourself go to, for example, a grocery store and say you are charging a markup of 40 cents on a loaf of bread, therefore it has to be regulated?
Right. If I was government, maybe, but otherwise,
if you're a government, if you're a government, maybe, of course, But yes. But as an individual, no, for sure. Not at all. Yeah. Like, of course, gasoline is so closely scrutinized. Yeah. But on the whole, no one would do that. And this idea that we can fix the problems of a market with more socialism. It's utter nonsense. The exact opposite happens when you have a few central bureaucrats plan or put price ceilings on or decide for the collective how, what price something should be. It always, always, always leads to shortages or inefficiencies in some regard. So that's definitely not the answer. Yeah, that's definitely not the answer.
Right. And with that, then, I guess, do you mind maybe just touching on one or two quick points on what would be the solution and what would actually bring the prices down if they were meant to be lower? Like, what's the reason for the prices being so high? How would we get them down?
Yeah, good question. So the first thing I would say is, if you want to look at price gougers, just look to government. Like, would you be able to put that graph back on the screen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so when you do that, you can take a look and you see the top bar, and that's the taxes that are added on a liter of gasoline. And of course, the taxes are massive, right? Huge taxes. Before the tax cut here in Alberta of the 13 cents, you had taxes of like 42 cents per liter. And that's only going to increase, right? By 2030, the carbon tax alone, which at present is 11 some cents per liter, will be 40 cents per liter. So that's a huge chunk of the price of gasoline. So for a politician to say that gas companies or gas pumps are price gouging, it's like, well, he who's without sin, cast it, right? It's like cast the stone, look to thyself first and see, and then we can discuss after. So that'd be the very first thing you would do. At the APP, we're advocating for like the immediate abolition of these ridiculous taxes on gasoline. Like, you have to seriously, if you're even going to keep them at all, you have to seriously restrict them. No carbon tax, no flat federal excise tax of 10 cents per liter. The tax on tax is ridiculous. To think that you're actually adding a tax after you've taken the price of gasoline with all other taxes taken into account is unbelievable, right? All of these taxes are ridiculous. So you should remove them. That'd be the first thing. Now, the second thing is more radical is the wrong word, but I don't know, first of all, if it's viable, and secondly, if the public would accept it. So here's an idea. You and I, as those gas pump owners, have you thought of my store name yet or no?
I don't know. Maybe Stanley's store.
Stanley's store is kind of cool. That's not bad.
One Stop Stanley. I don't know.
I don't know. Oh, One Stop Stanley? That's pretty good too. We have One Stop Stanley, Stanley's store, and then what was yours called? Continental Cafe? Continental?
No, Continental Convenience.
Which is also cool. Really cool. So we have a bunch of great ideas, but nonetheless. So the reason that you and I, in that instance, in that example, could tacitly collude is because we could see each other's prices. If I couldn't see your prices, and if you couldn't see the prices of, you couldn't see my prices, if you couldn't see the price of my gasoline for a liter, well, then tacit collusion becomes almost impossible, or at the very least, becomes much more difficult to the point of it's not even economically feasible to tacitly collude. So what if you hid the prices? What if you took away those big signs? I'm not saying you should do this. This is just an idea. If you took away those big signs outside of the gas pumps that tell you what the price is per liter, well, then you can no longer look outside your window and say, oh, he's raised his price 3 cents. Instead, you have to price competitively or as competitively as you can, right? If I'm taking all of the business, there's no telling why I'm taking it. Maybe it's because my prices are lower. Maybe it's just because people like the way that my store looks. Who knows? But the point is that you can't collude anymore, or certainly not to the extent that you were. And so that's an idea that should be explored, is whether or not you should make it so that prices for gasoline per liter have to be hidden in order to try and eliminate that tacit collusion, right? Because it's almost impossible to monitor. It's just a fact of a fallen world, insofar as you can't, if a man's not explicitly guilty, you can't put him in prison, or you can't charge him with collusion, right? It's just a fact of the market. So maybe you do that. I don't know. Maybe you don't. Maybe people still want to see the gas prices, and they just take a small hit with the price of gas, or maybe they don't. Maybe they want to get rid of collusion totally, and so they decide to take away the signs. That's a first step. But again, it's important to note that over the course of history, over the long run, right? Even if there is collusion, the profits on a liter of gasoline have been next to
nothing.
Right. They've been next to nothing. And so it's premature to judge right now that they're explicitly colluding and they're gouging us for all we're worth. It's like, just, again, I know that prices are high, and they are high, like they're unbelievably high. And that's because of all of these restrictions and so on. But it might be that next week, again, as I mentioned, that stepladder, the prices come down. Well, then the problem is resolved. Who knows? It's just, it's so early in the actual simulation itself that it's as I mentioned, premature to say this is the cause for this. This is precisely the reason this has happened. That won't work. It just isn't accurate. So that's what we're proposing: a removal of restrictions, a removal of taxes, and then something just to think about is what would happen if competitors couldn't see their other competitors' price of gasoline. They'd be probably forced to lower their price of gasoline itself for themselves, just to ensure that they still capture a market. So
Absolutely. Well, there we go. That was a great podcast. Like we mentioned at the very start, I will be heading up to Lloydminster right after this gets posted and published. So we are excited for the Lloyd event. If you are listening to this before 5:30 p.m. and you are in the Lloydminster area, feel free to come on out. We'd love to see you there. There's going to be some barbecues going. Like I said, we're going to have some great speeches. It should be a really, really fun event. It is at Bud Miller All Seasons Park there in Lloyd, one of the most famous parks in Lloyd. Also, maybe one of the only parks in Lloyd, but that's okay. We will. It still is one of the most famous. So we are excited for that. With that said, though, if you are not there, but you still want to get involved with the project, I'd love to have you on board. You can go to our website, albertaprosperityproject.com. It's there that you can become a member. It's there that you can also join the project as a volunteer. We need as many volunteers as possible. We are now well over 1,000 volunteers with us, so we are so excited for that. So excited to see what the rest of the summer has in store for us. And with that said, it was great talking to you again there, Tanner, and we will see you next week.
You bet. See you later.
See ya.